Dr. W talks. Can we prove or disprove anything? Knowledge is often placed in 2 or 3 categories. It can be empirical, based on evidence. It can be rational, based on our thoughts and understanding. The categories of empirical and rational have been very important in Western philosophy for hundreds of years. Many religious believers also argue that we can know things because of revelation, something that God shows us to be true. Verification theory. In the early 1900s, a group of philosophers decided that revelation and rationality were not very good ways of knowing things. Instead, they said, we should only focus on what we can know empirically. They became known as the Vienna Circle, their theory known as logical positivism, and this specific idea was called the principle of verification. According to this, knowledge is only true knowledge if we can know it through evidence with absolute certainty. For we shall maintain that no statement which refers to a reality transcending the limits of all possible sense experience can possibly have any literal significance, from which it must follow that the labours of those who have striven to describe such a reality have all been devoted to the production of nonsense. They said we can ignore any type of knowledge that cannot be proved. This included most religious and philosophical ideas and anything that is not based on empirical knowledge. However, many other philosophers pointed out problems with verification theory. For instance, our ideas and understanding of science are constantly changing. Even our ideas of history are only based on limited sources. Can we really know anything at all beyond a shadow of a doubt? Empirical evidence can only tell us when something is truth within the limits of the experiments we've conducted through a process of deductive reasoning, or the sources we have access to. But Ayer had argued that something can only be proved to be true if it's impossible to have any doubts about it at all. Eventually, even he had to admit that this category had no possible application. Verification theory had failed. Even so, this was still a popular philosophical background to many aspects of learning up until the 1960s and 1970s, and was a prominent theory behind the secularization of many academic subjects. Falsification theory. Whereas verification theory said some things were impossible to prove, falsification theory is the idea that it's very hard to disprove things. You would have to know everything that is in time and space to be sure that something such as a God didn't exist somewhere. However, we can still qualify things and learn more about them through falsification. One of the most well-known debates on this was held between Anthony Flew, Basil Mitchell, and R.M. Hare in 1971. Flew based his argument on the parable of the gardener by John Wisdom. In this story, 2 people, let's call them Theo the theist and Athena the atheist, are walking through a forest when they come across a beautiful grove. Theo speaks first. Hey, this garden is so beautiful. It must have a gardener.
No, all these plants could have just been put here at random.
No, look at how beautiful the flowers and the colours are, and the order. There's definitely a gardener.
Fine, let's wait here and see if the gardener shows up.
They wait all day and all night and all the next day, but no one shows up.
See, no gardener, now can we go?
No, hold on. I'm sure the gardener has been intended to these plants. What if he's invisible?
Are you serious? An invisible gardener?
Why not? It'd have to be a pretty impressive gardener to look after this beautiful place anyway.
Okay, so let's put a fence around the garden and see if that stops the gardener getting in and looking after it.
But, okay, fine. They build a fence around the grove. They come back a few days later, and the place looks similar to before.
There, no difference, no invisible gardeners. Satisfied?
No, maybe the gardener can fly, or can get through fences.
Okay, how about this? Let's get some bloodhounds. They can smell and track down anyone, even if they can fly and they're invisible. Let's see if the bloodhounds can smell your gardener out.
They get some bloodhounds. The bloodhounds have a good sniff around, but don't seem to find anything.
Happy now?
No, because what if the gardener doesn't smell? They could be so special that they're beyond the smell of bloodhounds. This argument can go on for days. Athena can keep coming up with ways to try to disprove the gardener, and Theo will keep claiming the gardener exists. Anthony Flew used this parable to ask this question. In the end, what is the difference between Theo's gardener, who is invisible, intangible, can't be smelt, and perhaps has no impact on the garden, from a gardener who simply doesn't exist? Flew argued that the idea of the gardener in Theo's mind has changed from the gardener he originally thought of. In fact, he has suffered death by 1,000 qualifications and has become harder and harder to believe in. Flew argued that the same is true of religion and God. Ultimately, we can't disprove either, but sometimes there is so much evidence against them that they may as well not exist. The same argument can be used against many conspiracy theories when confronted with enough evidence. However, Basil Mitchell disagreed with Flew. He pointed out that many people claim to have a relationship with God and claim to have experienced him. If Theo in the parable claimed to have met the gardener, that would have changed everything and made him much harder to disprove. Mitchell used the parable of a partisan who met their leader, then kept on believing in them even when all sorts of problems arose in the resistance, as a counterpoint to Flew's argument. Meanwhile, Hare argued that it's perfectly possible for a rational person to believe something that may seem to be irrational. He called this a blick. Theists such as John Hick have criticised Hare's point of view here, arguing that referring to all religious belief as a blick is reducing it too much, when it is based on faith and principles that many see as valid as any others. Theists may argue that belief in God has always relied on faith and could never be proved or disproved anyway. Eschatological verificationism. John Hick presented his own parable here. Let's imagine Theo and Athena again, but this time they're on a walk down a long and winding road. The celestial city's at the end of this road. It will be so exciting to get there.
The celestial city? Don't be silly, that place doesn't even exist.
Of course it does. It's probably just round the next corner. They keep walking. They go round a corner, but do not see the celestial city.
See? No celestial city?
I mean the next corner. It's just a bit further. They keep walking, but do not see it.
There really isn't a celestial city. You're never going to find it, Theo.
If we keep walking far enough down the road, we'll get there in the end. As long as the road keeps going, whatever Athena says, she can't prove Theo wrong. Theo will always be able to say that the celestial city is just a bit further along the road. He cannot be proved wrong, but if they found the celestial city, he would be proved right. This is what Hick calls eschatological verificationism. We may only find out the truth of religious claims at the end of time or at our death, and until then, it is impossible to disprove them. Language games. In contrast, Wittgenstein developed the idea of language games. He argued that language only gains meaning when we start to use it in its own context. Of course, nothing can be proved or disproved objectively, but we can understand things in relation to each other within their own game or context. We have invented language as a tool for humans to use, so there are problems with thinking about words away from the concept of how we experience them. Something is only real insofar as it exists within a certain game and certain set of thoughts. We are incapable of leaving a game and finding the real meaning behind a concept, because it is us that gave that concept meaning in the first place. So think about this. If I say the word book, what do you think of? If you were in a library, bookshop or book club, it's fairly clear what book would mean. If we were in a Bible study, you might know I was talking about a specific book of the Bible, which narrows it down from many millions to 66, with whatever our shared beliefs were about this. If we were watching a football match and I said the referee should book a player, you would also know I meant they should get a yellow card and be written in the referee's notebook. According to Wittgenstein, none of these words has any inherent meaning by itself, but they all gain their meaning through the way that we use them in our specific game. If Wittgenstein shows that language only exists subjectively anyway, can it ever really be possible to prove or disprove things? The argument remains open today.